Hello, this is Elder Tehila Firewind, High Priestess of the Covenant of the Open Mind, and you're watching Astrology 101. This is Lecture 6, and the topic this time is aspects. Aspects are the angles formed between planets, and lots of aspects are found within single charts. So if you remember the analogy from the first week, we said that the house is the stage, the planet is the actor, and the sign is the costume that the actor is wearing. In that analogy, the aspects would be like the chemistry between actors. So there are many kinds of aspects, and we can't really cover them all. So in the reading assignment that goes along with each of these lectures, the last slide of each presentation, for this week, there's like a ton, but each of them is like a paragraph. So if you're really serious about astrology, I would at least read all of them. I will say that I don't use aspects that often. Every so often, like there will be an obvious one that's very important to the reading of the chart, but most of the time, you could get away by just intuiting. Well, it depends on what kind of person. It depends on what's in your chart. It depends on what kind of person you are, but I get away with intuiting what the relationship between the planets means and don't focus as much on the actual formal definition of aspects in each chart. But what I want to do is just run through a brief overview of each aspect and what it means, most commonly what it means, and then talk about a few additional things like axes, so like nodes and vertexes, and that will cover everything in astrology, like all of the topics. That gives you an overview of pretty much everything. But if you are really interested in this, in aspects, then you're going to want to continue to research it on your own, because I'm just giving a very high level overview here. So the first aspect is called a conjunction. This happens when the planets are in the same sign, in the same house. So sometimes the sign will be on the cusp, and it'll be technically in two houses. So in that case, you can have two planets that are within 10 degrees, but one is in one house and one is in the other. So that's not a conjunction. They have to be in the same sign and the same house. The signs, can be anything. The position in the chart can be anywhere. It doesn't have to be in the first 10 degrees like it's shown in this image. It can be anywhere. So once you identify a conjunction, usually it just means that there's power in that sign, that there's like a concentrated or directed force of whatever nature the sign and house is located in. So say you have Mars and Venus, and they are in conjunction, and let's just, for all intents and purposes, let's just put them in the fourth house, and let's say that Scorpio is in that house. So that would mean, so you have Scorpio, I feel like we're playing Clue, Scorpio in the fourth house, and Mars and Venus are both in that house, and they're in conjunction. So that would mean that there's a very strong impulse that occurs that drives that person to some kind of fighting or discordant, and it would be because of manipulation. So that would indicate that they like to be in control of their friends, and that if they're not in control, then things don't go well, and they can probably sabotage relationships that way. So that would be what that means. You can have any combination of things. That was just an example. That was not a very pleasant example, sorry. But maybe we'll see some of this in the example charts. I can't remember. So that's conjunction. And the next one is called sextile. This means that there are two signs in between them. They're 60 degrees apart. With aspects, the where they're located matters. So in this case, like if you had one sign that's in Taurus and the next one is in Gemini, that might not be sextile, because even though they're like a sign apart, they have to have exactly or close to exactly 60 degrees between them. Most people say it has to be within 1 to 2 degrees to be considered an aspect, but there are some aspects that have an allowance as high as like 12 degrees, so it depends. But for the most part, like, it'll be obvious. Like, you'll be able to see it, like if you're looking at the planets and you go to copy them down. So what I usually do is I have a flat wheel like this, and I'll put the planets like where they actually are in the house. So like if the planet is just starting to enter Taurus, then I'll put it right here on the line. You know, if it's well within Taurus but not halfway through, then maybe I'll put it down like here, right? So that way when I look at the end chart, I can just visually see if there's something that makes that 60-degree angle or not. I don't spend a lot of time on aspects, but there are people who are like super anal retentive about this and say that you have to like calculate everything out exactly, but then those are the same people that like rely on cafe astrology to do the calculations for you, which is nice because like it'll print the chart with all of the aspects on it, but it has all the data that it's using is wrong. So it's not like that's actually where the planets are in the sky. So they're not making those angles with each other at all. So it's a good idea, but what we really need is for a software that does all the calculations like that to pull from an accurate data source, which would be nice. I'm looking into creating something that does that, but it turns out that it's not simple. So we'll see how long that takes me. Gonna finish my book first, and then maybe I'll make an astrology app. Anyway, so when the 60-degree angle is formed, that represents some kind of change, an opportunity, and then there's the minor aspect, the semi-sextile, which you see the smaller image over here, and that is an opportunity also, but an opportunity to change, and it'll be an unwelcome opportunity. So it'll be something that you might consider a difficulty, because in that case it would be like it's like the opposite of the main one. So the main one is an opportunity for change, like something positive, and the semi is an opportunity for change in a situation where that opportunity was not desired. So those two are similar, and this one is a minor aspect and this is a major one. So that doesn't mean a whole lot. Those are just categorizations. Square is the third aspect. It's called square because it forms a right triangle between planets. So you have 90 degrees is the angle. In this one, it represents obstacles, so things that are solid and unavoidable. So you can think about this, so the sextile is like an opportunity for change, right? As in an obstacle that can be overcome if you change yourself. And this would be an obstacle that is not going to be overcome, something that will just set you back and you have to just work around it. The semi aspect, the minor aspect, the semi-square is also like an obstacle, but in this case, it's like an obstacle of your own making. So like karma, right? So the large one, the square aspect is any obstacle, be it something within your control or not, and the semi-square is something that you're going to cause yourself. So the semi-square can be particularly helpful if you're doing different kinds of astrology, or if you're using the natal astrology chart to like predict someone's future, because that can tell you like when certain planets are making those angles with each other. That can tell you like when those people are likely to make decisions that they'll regret and what the nature of those decisions will be. If you guys didn't see, each of these has like a symbol associated with it that you'll see in like ephemeris charts if you use like an astrology tool that's not Stellarium, and I urge you to use Stellarium to leave all those things behind, but if you don't, you'll see these symbols, so that's why I put them on each slide, just for your reference. Okay, so trine, this is my favorite one because it sounds fancy. Trine is 4 signs apart, a 120-degree angle is formed. This one represents a creative spark, source of inspiration, source of imagination, and you can think about it because the 5th house, as we learned in the last lecture, is the house of manifestation and creativity, and the keywords for that house are I create. So this one, it's almost like it's four full houses, and so it's almost like it's transitioning into that creative energy, right? So that's like where the meaning of this one comes from. And this can explain like if someone has two signs that are trine in their chart, it can be very clear, like, oh, this is where your source of inspiration is. So if you hit a writer's block, then go to this place. Like maybe you have like a relationship that indicates that you do best at breaking down blocks and coming up with good ideas when you're out in nature or when you're working together. You know, that's the kind of thing that trine would indicate. And opposition, so this is the most well-known. This is when the planets are directly opposite each other, 6 signs apart, 100-degree angles. So when two planets are in opposition, then you get polarized action. It doesn't necessarily mean that they are like opposing each other, as it sounds like it should mean. Sometimes it means that you know, you take a blended approach to things and you pull on 2 very different energy sources for that. You know, so that, you know, that is something that could happen if you have like Capricorn rising and then across from Capricorn, so say you have Capricorn rising and then Saturn is directly across from that sign. So in this case, that's going to be in opposition to the zodiacal sign, and Saturn is the planet that rules Capricorn. So you're going to find that you want to spend a lot of time, like, you know, doing certain things that pull you away from your true self, that make you feel less disciplined in this case, or ambitious, because that's the energy of Capricorn. So that's an example of how it might pull you away. But let's say now that Saturn is in Capricorn rising, and then in opposition to that, let's say you have like Mars or something. So that would mean that you spend a lot of time like being disciplined and ambitious, but maybe like you need to distract yourself and do like creative things that are not necessarily related to what you're working on, and that way you can stay charged, you can stay energized. So that would be an example of how they're not really in opposition, because the Saturn in Capricorn would be exalted, so it'd be very strong energy. So the Mars is not going to really pull you that far away from that energy, right? It's just going to reflect like having to take a blended approach to something. So that's what I mean when I say polarized action. And it also represents awareness, particularly of like your competing traits. If you have a lot of things in opposition, then you can be like bipolar, stuff like that, you know. So that's a really common sign that someone has issues with like bipolar depression if they have a lot of planets in opposition to the signs that they rule or each other. It depends on everything. In case it isn't clear now to you guys, this is very complicated and there's a lot of factors, and there's definitely no 2 identical charts. Like even people born at the exact same time, if they're born in different parts of the world, there's going to be some details that are different. So, okay. Then there's some minor aspects worth mentioning. Quintile, that's the 72-degree angle that represents harmony, equilibrium, or flow. So that is an example of one where you need to have the degrees fairly accurate, because if you're off by like so many degrees, then it's closer to a square or something, you know. And then the quiconks I can never pronounce this. Quiconks inconjunct. Say that 5 times fast. That's a 150-degree angle, and that represents discord or disequilibrium or ebb. So these two are opposites from each other, and if you notice, the reason for that is that they like the 72-degree one is like almost exactly half of the 150-degree one, right? So it's like, so they're similar shapes. I have never seen a symbol for quintile. A lot of people ignore these two, honestly, because they're minor. But this one I've seen the symbol for, so I included it. I couldn't find the symbol for quintile. There might be one. I didn't even look that hard, because I don't spend a lot of time on aspects, which is why we're not spending a lot of time on aspects. Okay, so I want to mention the asteroids. There are many people who swear by these asteroids, and in the astrology course that I took, the instructor spoke about asteroids for like an hour, but I don't understand how the asteroids could have a real tangible effect on us. Because, so for instance, I looked up Chiron, which is a large asteroid, and Vesta is pretty large as far as asteroids go. And like both of these could end the Earth if they hit the Earth probably. And they're like 160 miles. Like radius is 160 miles. The radius of Earth is like over 6,000, right, or something like that. So they're so small. And Earth is small, okay, as far as planets go. Earth is pretty small. So I can't understand how these asteroids would have any effect on Earth. They're not gravitationally significant to either the Earth or the Sun. So I don't get it. I don't get the asteroids. But there are many people who swear by it. So I didn't want my 101 course to not have them. So here they are. Here's how they associate, and here's their archetypes. Okay, Chiron's the wounded healer. So supposedly wherever Chiron is placed in your chart will reflect what in your life needs healing or what you need to work on in order to become whole. With Vesta, and the reason why these all have slashes is because they're Greco-Roman, so they have multiple names depending on what language tree you're looking at. So Vesta is the keeper of the sacred flame, represents focus, dedication, spiritual manifestation, like the best way that you manifest your spiritual goals specifically. So think of like the fifth house, it's similar energy, maybe to that, but for spirituality. And then you have Minerva, the intellectual warrior, wisdom, logic, talent. So many of these qualities also you find throughout the other signs in the chart anyway. So I don't really get the appeal of tracking asteroids. But I think if I remember correctly, there are some systems of astrology where the asteroids are like the most important thing. To me, that makes no sense. I'm a physicist, okay? So for me, what matters is whether or not there might actually be a basis in science. And so I don't really buy the asteroid thing, but here they all are. If you're interested in them and in using them, then you're welcome to. And you can track all these things in Stellarium also. It has everything in it, like everything. So it's for you if you want to use it. I don't, but you're welcome to. Okay. Nodes. So now we're going to talk about axes. If you notice on this one and on the charts, on one of the slides far up at the start of this lecture, I did include a link to where I found the charts. I didn't make these, so thank you to the groups who put these charts together. And I do urge people to check out these other sites if you're really interested, because they provide a lot more information than I'm offering you here, because I don't really use these things that much. Okay, so the axes, there are 4 of them that we'll talk about. There supposedly are 6, but I don't really get the last 2. So I'm just going to talk about 4. And if you're interested, you can read about all 6 of them some other time. These are completely imagined points. They're not actually significant. They have to be calculated for every person individually. And they all have to do with the intersection between different orbits. So for nodes, that's one axis, and you'll see on the next slide, I'll show you all the axes. And these ones are where the orbit of the moon intersects the Earth's orbit around the sun. And that will vary depending on where you're located on the globe. That might vary, but I think for the most part, this one is going to be something that varies by the time of year. And the 2 nodes just represent the past and the future. So one, the south node describes the longing to return to comfort. It's called the tail of the dragon, and it reflects past lives as well. And the north node would be the head of the dragon, and that is the future and how this longing is satisfied. So you could think about it like the south node is, why were you born this life? And what lesson are you meant to learn this lifetime that you didn't learn in the past lives? And the north node is, how will this lesson be learned? Will it actually get learned this time? And what experiences are you due to have? So that's the, here it is, and that's called the karmic or fate axis, right? So fate axis. So that makes sense. It's what is the fate of your life? And so here you see that it's drawn at the 45-degree angle between the two main axes, which we talked about in the first one, which we'll talk a bit more about in a second. But it's probably gonna vary depending on where you're located on the globe and what time of the year it is. So that's gonna shift around. And there is a way to find that in Stellarium. I haven't done it. I don't really look at these things that often when I do star charts. If our example video does not go on too long, we can look at it together, but I suspect it's going to be very long, even without looking at axes. So this information I'm more just providing to you, the viewer, and you can go and take a look at this. But I'm sure there's a way to determine these things in Stellarium, because you can like make all the different grids show up and then just look at where these things intersect. The nodes might be a challenge, but it would definitely be easy to find out what the midheaven is, because that's just whatever is directly above you. But in this case, on the ecliptic. And I'm not 100% sure I understand the difference between Destiny's Gate and the midheaven either, because the midheaven is technically like directly above you, but it must mean whatever is on the ecliptic directly above you, because the ecliptic is where all the zodiacal signs are. Otherwise you'd be like, oh, Pegasus, like what does that mean, right? So I couldn't find a resource specifying, but I'm fairly sure that midheaven is just the sign that's the highest in the sky at the date and time of birth. And then the vertex is calculated, it's actually the intersection of the ecliptic, which is what has all the planets on it, that goes around like kind of like this, right? And so here's the Earth here in the center, and this is the ecliptic, so this is where all the planets are. And then you have this circle that comes around from the midheaven down to this ecliptic, right? So there's a circle that goes like this, and this would be the prime vertex. That's what it's called, prime vertical circle. And then this intersection between those 2 points is the vertex. So the vertex is probably easy to look up. And I would argue it's the most important of all these axes, besides the ascendant, descendant, which is often called the magnetic axis. I feel like we talked about what it means to be an ascendant or descendant enough in the houses series, so I won't go over that again. But I will talk a little bit more about this, the Destiny's Gate. So that's the vertex, anti-vertex. So wherever that vertex is, the anti-vertex is directly opposite it. And this represents change caused by small, unexpected opportunities or challenges. And that can be anything from, well, it's going to depend on what star sign is actually in the vertex. So then the anti-vertex is like the opposite of that. It's like things that will hinder you from growing, lack of opportunity, that sort of thing. Then you have the midheaven and the nadir. So I'm not sure the difference between the midheaven and the vertex, but the nadir is directly down. So if wherever you're standing on the Earth, it's whatever's on the other side of the Earth, basically, from you. And the nadir is what you choose to keep private. So your private persona, personal matters that you don't necessarily want to share with everyone. And the midheaven is how you come across to people without trying. And you could think about this too, like the 10th house, right? So the midheaven's on the cusp of the 10th house. And the 10th house governs your public status, right? So this is like the basis of that. So it's exactly the same as with the other axis that we were talking about. This is like the basis of the public self. And even those who haven't met you face to face will have some idea of who you are, and that will align with the midheaven. That's your public persona. So those are the axes. Like I said, I don't do a whole lot with these. aspects, definitely I look at least a little bit, but when it comes to these things, it's all about the angles that the Earth is making with the sun, and I just don't know how much any of that matters. I think that the bulk of the effect of the planetary motion on Earth is probably caused by gravitational waves. So if I found scientific reason to consider these things to be more important, then I would, but in my experience, you can interpret a chart and not really look at any of these things. So it's up to you whether or not you're interested in incorporating these in your own personal practice or not. So now the information is here, and you know what keywords to search if you want more information. So that wraps up this lecture, nice and short. Next time we're going to do two natal charts, two examples, one that is my own and one that belongs to a person who gave me permission to share the chart anonymously. And then finally, I'll do a short lecture that goes over the couple other applications for astrology that you could look into. And like I said, the reading this time is terrible. Some of these, though, are like not even a paragraph. I didn't even talk about the bowl pattern. I didn't talk about any of the patterns, okay? So the bowl pattern is like if all the planets are, they form like a bowl. If they are all like in a specific type of clump, I think that's what the bucket is, or that might be the bundle. I don't even keep track of them all. There's so many. Like, if you're really interested in this, I'd read all of these sections and write everything down. But if you're just like trying to get through your own natal chart, then you probably don't need any of this. It's very advanced. And this isn't even all of them. All of these that I listed here, there's more in the book that I left out because I just didn't think they were that important. So, but I put all the patterns. I definitely put all the patterns because I didn't talk about the patterns at all. So I did talk about them a little bit in the sense that, like, someone who has a lot of signs in the northern hemisphere tends to be more selfish than someone who has them on the other side. So that is technically, because that's technically a pattern. I'm pretty sure that's the bowl pattern. So, but anyway, so if you're interested, look at all the aspects found in the astrology book because I'm not covering them. So thanks for joining us. And from all of us here at the Covenant of the Open Mind, blessed be.